everyone, thanks for coming today and welcome to PrepScholar SAT's Math Everest, breaking down 5 of the hardest SAT math questions. So really quickly, please comment in the chat to say hi and let us know if you can hear and see everything okay. If you're having any technical difficulties, please let us know. But we'll go ahead and get started while we wait for some more people to join. So really quickly, I'm going to introduce myself. So hello. Hi. My name is Erika. I am on the content and tutoring teams here at PrepScholar. And basically what that means is that I write lessons, questions, explanations, and then I teach those lessons, questions, and explanations to our tutoring students all over the world via the internet. And like all of the other writers and tutors here at PrepScholar, I have a 99th percentile SAT score, and I have years of experience teaching the SAT. So I'm going to go ahead and disappear again, but I'm still here. So you can find more about PrepScholar at PrepScholar.com. So the link is at the bottom of the screen if you're interested in checking that out. We'll talk more about PrepScholar's online program in a little while, but we'll kick things off with a warm-up SAT math problem. So go ahead and take about 30 seconds on this one, and then we'll talk about it together. Okay, so if you've gotten an answer for this one, go ahead and put it in the chat. But we'll go ahead. So the answer to this one was D. Now, really quickly, we'll talk about how you could get that. So the way to get this one is to recognize that when we have I squared, we're going to have the square root of -1 squared, which gives us -1. So when we go ahead and plug in -1 for I squared, we end up with 9 times -1 for 9I squared, which is really -9. Now, here's another chance to make an error. We want to make sure to distribute this negative sign. So we have negative minus 9, so that's plus 9, and then minus -6i, so that's 6i, plus 6i, and then combining like terms, we have 5 plus 9, which is 14, and 12i plus 6i, which is 18i, which gives us D. Now, this problem deals with complex numbers, but the question itself is not the most complex. Ugh, bad joke. But this is what this webinar is focused on. This webinar will be focused on the more complex questions on the SAT and how to handle those questions. So what we'll help you do in this webinar is we'll teach you how to tackle particularly tricky SAT math questions. So to help you get through those questions and get through them faster. And this will help you boost your score by giving you good tactics to tackle these hard math questions as well as good best practices for any SAT math questions. So this will be especially important if you're working on the last 50 to 100 points of your score. Now, we're also going to talk about a special offer on PrepScholar SAT's online program. So this special offer is $40 off the SAT Complete Prep, which is our online program that I talked about earlier. Now, there's a link on this slide, and there's also going to be a link in the chat for you to use. Now, you can click on this link and use it throughout the webinar, but want to really quickly let you know that this discount does expire after the webinar. So if you do want to use it, make sure to use it before the webinar is up. We rarely offer discounts for PrepScholar, so this is a really special opportunity. We'll talk more about it later, but feel free to go for it if you feel confident that you want to go for it now. So really quickly, an overview of what we're going to do today. So first, we're going to talk about what these SAT questions have in common, so how we chose these as some of the hardest SAT math questions out there. Then we're going to do 2 problem walkthroughs. So walk through 2 of the most difficult SAT math problems. Then we're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to come back and do a PrepScholar SAT online program tour. So what the SAT online program looks like for PrepScholar. And then we're going to do 2 more difficult problem walkthroughs. Then we're going to do a quick overview of the different strategies that we can use for these problems and to study for these problems. Finally, we're going to get to how PrepScholar can help you and a question and answer. And then we're going to do our last question as a bonus at the very end. So that might go slightly over our time, but if you want to stick around for it, it's a really good one. All right, so what do the hardest SAT math questions have in common? So one of the things they have in common is that they often test several concepts at once. Now, here's a really quick example of that. Now, looking at this question, you don't need to solve it. We're not going to dig into this one too deep. But if you take a look, you'll notice, wow, there's a lot of stuff going on. So there's a fraction, and there are exponents. We notice that there are negative exponents and fractional exponents. That's a lot of stuff going on. Now, this type of testing multiple concepts is really common in these particularly difficult problems. This one is largely focused on exponents, but many hit multiple different topics. So it's kind of complex because it requires us to think in a couple of different spaces at once. Another thing that the hardest SAT math questions have in common is that they often involve multiple steps. Now, very few SAT questions are just bing, bang, boom, one and done. But the hardest SAT math questions will involve a lot of steps. So more than 3, more than 4. They'll be particularly complicated. So here's an example of what we mean here. So if we read through this one, we see, okay, x is the average of m and 9, y is the average of 2m and 15, and z is the average of 3m and 18. If all of that's true, what is the average of x, y, and z in terms of m? So that's pretty complicated. So we have to find 1, 2, 3 averages, and then put all of that information together to find a 4th average. Pretty intense. So this is a lot of work. So 1, this can take a lot of time, and 2, it's very easy to mix up information, to miss information. So the fact that there is so much going on here and so many steps gives us more opportunity for error. All right, another thing that we see in the most difficult SAT math questions, they're often worded in unusual or convoluted ways. And if you're not sure what that means, take a look at this question. So first thing we notice is it's pretty lengthy, right? There's a bunch of words here, which already makes it pretty difficult, but we see a bunch of weird stuff. 1, this is a geometry question, and there's no diagram. Yikes. So that means that this is already not presented in the most convenient way. Typically, we want to present things about a triangle on a triangle. We also see a bunch of kind of confusing language. They're similar. The vertices correspond to other vertices respectively, the corresponding side. There's a lot going on here, and it's not phrased in the most easy to interpret way. So this is one thing that questions do to make these more confusing. They take something that we might understand and then phrase it in a way that we won't. So kind of related to this last problem, the hardest SAT math questions are often very wordy. So if we thought the last one was long, take a look at this one. So this is technically 2 problems, but this is a lot of information for 2 problems. So this information goes with both 37 and 38. This is 37. This is 38. Now, one thing to know about these hardest problems is that they often occur toward the end of a section. And so what that means for us is that we're probably running out of time at this point. So if we haven't managed our time particularly well, we're low on time and we're getting some of our longest questions. So this makes questions particularly difficult. It's also difficult to decipher what's important and what's not from all of these words, because not everything in here is going to be important. All right, hardest SAT math questions often involve many different variables, so they have a lot of different components. So here's an example of that. And this might not be immediately what you think of when you think a bunch of different variables. You might think X, Y, Z, but these are other types of variables. They're variables with words. So if we notice here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 variables in this problem, and we need to put them together to answer this question. And in fact, if we go ahead and read this question, we'll find that we don't need every single one of these variables to answer it. So what that means is not only do we have a lot of variables, we need to figure out which ones are important to us. So this is another thing that makes these problems particularly challenging. All right, and finally, some of the hardest SAT math questions test less familiar or unknown concepts. Now, these aren't quite as common, so we don't have an example for this one, but what this means is that they'll test things that maybe you don't know and that the average test taker isn't going to know. So this is less important and a little bit more difficult to study for. However, it is something that we do want to target. So this won't be difficult because of strategy. It'll be difficult because of the actual information in the question. So this is often something related to maybe trig is a common one here. All right, so now that we've gone over what makes the most difficult SAT questions the most difficult SAT questions, let's go ahead and jump in with one of them. So go ahead and give yourselves 30 seconds to read through this problem, get started, and then we'll talk about it together. All right, so we'll go ahead and jump in. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to give this a quick read. So what we notice right away is that this is a word problem. Now, word problems are typically longer. They typically have more information in them. And what that means for us is that we need to take our time with them. We need to break apart this information slowly. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go one sentence at a time, take things apart, and write things down. So starting with our first sentence, we see oil and gas production in a certain area dropped from 4 million barrels in 2000 to 1.9 million barrels in 2013. That's some information. Now, when we get information, it's often a good idea to organize it. Information is not very useful to us in sentence form, so a really good call is to use a table. So we have a table here, and the information that's given to us is the production for each year. So we can go ahead and set up a table with year on one side and production on the other. And then we'll go ahead and take a note of each piece of information. So here we know that in 2000 we have 4 million barrels. And in 2013 we have 1.9 million barrels. Cool. We don't really know how this information is going to be used, but we've at least got it organized in a way that we can see it pretty easily. All right, so the next line, assuming that the oil and gas production decreased at a constant rate. Okay, cool, I'm assuming that. Which of the following linear functions f best models the production in millions of barrels t years after the year 2000? Okay, so that's referring to the answer choices here. So these are linear functions. So they are decreasing at a constant rate. Cool, all right. And we see that it's a linear function f in terms of t. Cool. But what we also notice is that that relates to the information that we already have. So if we look at this a little closer, we see, okay, so the linear function f models the production in millions of barrels. So really this production is f. We can take away our millions because it's in millions. So we have f is 4 and 1.9. Cool. All right. Then we look at our second part, t years after the year 2000. Okay, so we've got the year here, but we want to find the years after 2000. So 2000 is 0 years after 2000, and 2013 is 13 years after the year 2000. So in fact, we can change our table to be t is 0 and 13. Awesome. Okay, now let's go ahead and dig into this. At this point, we have a couple of different routes we can go. So we take a look at the answer choices, which we kind of already did, and we see, hey, these are linear functions, f in terms of t. So our first route that we can go is we can find the equation of this line using our information. So this isn't using our answer choices too much. So if we think about the way these lines would look, basically we have our f as our y and our t as our x value, which is kind of interesting. It really means that these data points we collected earlier are like coordinate points. So if t represents x, that's our x coordinate, and if f represents y, we have our y coordinate here. So we have two coordinates on a line. Well, what can we do with two coordinates? Well, right away, we can find our slope. So to really quickly pause, ideally we would have started with our y-intercept because we have it right here. It's 0, 4. So it's going to intercept the y-axis at 0, 4. But unfortunately, all of these answer choices have the same y-intercept, so it's not particularly helpful. So we need to go to the slope. Now, we find the slope by doing the rise over run. So by doing one of our y-coordinates minus the other y-coordinate over one of our x-coordinates minus our other x-coordinate. Or in our case, f2 minus f1 over t2 minus t1. So we can go ahead and plug in our coordinates to figure this out. Now, before we do that, what we should notice is that if we do the rise over the run, we're going to find that as t increases, so t goes up, f decreases, f goes down. So we're going to have a negative slope. We probably could have even inferred that from the question stem. Oil and gas production decreased at a constant rate, which means that a positive slope is not going to work here. So even without doing any math, we can eliminate A and B. And if we had to guess at this point, we'd have a 50% chance. But we can go ahead and do the actual math and plug in 1.9 minus 4 over 13 minus 0. Which gives us negative 2.1 over 13. Now, we might be really tempted to go, ooh, hey, I need a calculator here. But this is a no calculator question. So how are we supposed to do this without a calculator? Well, here we might want to take some cues from our answer choices. We see negative 21 over 130 and negative 19 over 130. So maybe I should make the slope over 130. Well, how do I do that? Multiply by 10 over 10. And this gives us negative 21 over 130. So the correct answer must have this slope, which means the correct answer is C. All right, now, if that didn't come to us, if we did not remember that, hey, we can find a slope using 2 points, what we can also do is plug in our coordinate points into our equations to test them. So we can start with A, and we'll plug in 1.9 for F. We'll have our slope right here, and then plug in 13 for T, plus 4. Now, again, we could start doing the math here, eliminate our 13s, blah, 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 but what we should notice is there is no way that this is going to give us a correct answer, right? Because we have 1.9 equals something that's going to be positive plus 4. There's no way. This would need to be negative for it to add to 4 and give us 1.9. So automatically we should go, all right, A and for that matter B are going to be wrong because they won't give us a proper answer. So we can go ahead and try C. Okay, 1.9 equals negative and the slope times 13 plus 4. Go ahead and go through that. So cancel out our 13s. We end up with 1.9 equals negative 21 over 10 plus 4. So that's 1.9 equals negative 2.1 plus 4. And that gives us 1.9 equals 1.9. And that tells us that this is true. This works given this point, which means that C is our answer. We can also test D if we want to see if that will work, but we should be able to infer that if this one worked, this one will not. So, what can we learn from question 1? Well, first we can learn that we don't want to skimp on our question stem interpretation. If we mix up any of this information, we're really going to struggle here. So we want to invest our time there. We also want to make sure to organize our information. That's kind of related to not skimping on your question stem interpretation. So making sure that it's in a form we can use later. And we also want to use our answer choices. So in our first method, we used the answer choices to eliminate earlier on. We also used it to figure out a quick mental math trick and avoid unnecessary calculations. And then in that second method, we actually use them to plug into. So our answer choices are useful when we get them. We don't always, so we want to make sure to use them when we do. All right, question 2. We're going to again take 30 seconds to look over that one, and then we'll go through it together. All right, hopefully you've had enough time to read this one. There's quite a bit of information here, but we should notice a couple of things off the top. So first, word problem, right? A lot of information, which means we're going to take it slowly, sentence by sentence. What we're also going to notice is that we have a table given to us. Wow, so we don't even necessarily have to draw that table that we did on the previous one. They give it to us. But what we should also notice is that if they give us a diagram or a table, we should definitely use it. So we have a table, we'll use it to organize our information as we go. So we'll go ahead and get reading on this one. So first sentence, the incomplete table above summarizes the number of left-handed students and right-handed students by gender for 8th grade students at this middle school. Okay, cool. So we have handedness, left and right over the top, gender, female and male, down the side, and then we have our totals. So this tells us that 18 students are left-handed and 122 students are right-handed. Cool. That all makes sense. We kind of already knew this. But let's go into our next sentence. So, there are 5 times as many right-handed female students as there are left-handed female students. Okay, so that's interesting. That means that if there's 1 left-handed female student, there will be 5 right-handed female students. Or if there's 2 left-handed female students, there will be 10 right-handed female students. But we don't know how many left-handed female students are. So what can we do? This is where it's a really good idea to define a variable. So in this case, we might define it as x. So we can say, all right, if there are x left-handed female students, there will be 5x right-handed female students. And really quickly, to make sure we didn't accidentally mix that up, we can plug in an easy number for x to check. So if x is 1, 5x is 5, so there's 1 left-handed female student, 5 right-handed female students. That makes sense. We want there to be more right-handed female students. So cool, we've represented this information in a way that makes sense. Let's go ahead and move on. There are 9 times as many right-handed male students as there are left-handed male students. So we can do this process again, defining this in terms of a variable because we don't actually know how many left-handed male students there are. Now this is where we want to be really careful because a lot of folks are going to go, okay, cool, x and 9x. But that would be a huge mistake. Now, why is that? Well, we've already defined what x is. It's the number of left-handed female students. And we don't know that it's the same for left-handed male students. So we want to be sure that once we've used a variable, we know exactly what that means. So it might be a really good idea at the top of our screen to define what x means, and then be sure to define a new variable for male left-handed students. So here we can choose something like y. So there's y left-handed male students, 9y right-handed male students. Cool. All right, let's go ahead and move on. If there is a total of 18 left-handed students. Okay, cool, so they already gave us that information, but what can we do with it? Well, if we look down this column, if there are x left-handed female students and y left-handed male students, and there's 18 left-handed students in total, we can build an equation. X plus y equals 18. All right. That's useful. Hopefully we'll be able to use it later. All right, we also know that there's a total of 122 right-handed students in the school, which again is given to us here. And again, we can read straight down the column to make a new equation. If there are 5x female students and 5x right-handed female students and 9y right-handed male students, we can add those together to get all 122 total right-handed students. Whew! Kind of a mouthful. All right, so moving on, we finally get to our question. Notice at this point, we have not read our question, so we're really taking our time here. All right, which of the following is closest to the probability that a right-handed student selected at random is female? So let's take our time here. The probability that a right-handed student selected at random is female. So we're not picking out of the total group of students here. We're picking just out of the right-handed students. And out of those students, we're trying to find the probability that the student is female. So right-handed female over right-handed students. Be really careful with defining this because this is probably the most common place that people mess up. So taking our values from the table, we can define this as 5x over 122. Now, if we can figure this out, we've got the answer. But we still don't know what x is. So how do we find that? Well, Cool, we've got a system of equations. So we can approach our system of equations the way we approach any system of equations, with either substitution or elimination. Now, this looks like substitution might be the easiest route, so that's the route I'm going to go. So we know that we want to solve for x, which means that we want an equation that only has x in it. So if we solve our first equation for y, we can plug 18 minus x in for y and be left with only x's. This is a really great route. If we'd solve for x's instead, we would have to plug it back in later and solve for x from y. So just kind of a confusing way, but this would be a little bit more straightforward. So plugging in 18 minus x for y, we get 5x plus 9 times 18 minus x equals 122. Distributing the 9, 5x plus 162 minus 9x equals 122. All right, combining like terms, we get negative 4x equals negative 40. And then to get x by itself, we want to divide by negative 4. We get x equals 10. Okay, cool. We've got x, but we're not done. We have to plug it back into the thing we're solving for. So plugging in 10 for x, we get 5 times 10 over 122, or 50 over 122. Now we can go to our answer choices. So looking at these decimals, they're a little bit close together. I'm not totally comfortable with estimating what this is, so I might go ahead and pop this into a calculator, which will tell us that the answer is A. All right, kind of a doozy. What did we learn here? So first, we want to be absolutely sure we know what the question is asking for. If we had solved for the wrong thing here, we very likely would have gotten one of those other trap answers. We also want to make sure that we use the diagrams that are given to us, right? We don't always get them, so we want to use them when we have them. We also want to make sure that we define variables carefully. So this is an example of a problem with multiple variables in it. And if we had not been careful, we could have very easily messed this one up. We also want to make sure that we do logical checks using small numbers. So when we are defining things with variables, we're making sure that we're defining them correctly. All right, we're going to go on a 5-minute water break, and when we get back, we'll do a quick tour of the PrepScholar GMAT online program and get back into our problem solving. All right, so that's our 5-minute water break. So we're going to go ahead and jump right back in. But before we jump into our questions, we're really quickly going to talk about what is PrepScholar. So PrepScholar primarily offers an online program, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. So this is what our online program looks like. So PrepScholar SAT's online program is customized to individual students. So before you start, you're going to answer a few questions about your goals and your test date, and you're also going to take a diagnostic. Now, based on the information from that questionnaire and from that diagnostic, PrepScholar SAT is going to use that information to build weekly study schedules of lessons leading up to your test date. So lessons, quizzes, and practice tests. And what it's also going to do is it's going to adjust your weekly assignments based on your progress in the program. So the overall goal of the online PrepScholar program is to make sure that you are focused on the right skills at the right level at any given time in your prep. So it's going to be customized to you and you personally. So this is what the dashboard will look like. So this is from my account personally. So your dashboard might not look exactly like this. For example, I have a lot of lessons this week, and you might not have as many lessons. So this is where you'll see your assigned lessons for the week. Now you can click on any one of these assignments to go to the lesson. So this is an advanced math lessons for ratios and proportions. So that means that either I started at an advanced level or I started at a core level and leveled up to advanced by taking a core level quiz. So we see that the lesson is super interactive. So we've got a video here if we prefer videos to text. We also see that we have a review function if we're not quite 100% ready for this lesson. We see that we've got drill questions where we can try out different answers and try out different question types. We also see that we're going to have example questions that are explained, different subsections. We'll have example problems as well, so these will be problems in the style of the SAT. We'll also see that there are explanations for those questions, etc., etc. So we'll get all the way down, finish the lesson, and once we finish the lesson, we can go ahead and take a quiz to test what we've learned. So after we finish the lesson, we're going to take a timed quiz. And so the time for the quiz will be based on how many questions are in the quiz. And this will test our learning with realistic SAT questions. So this is a grid-in question. This is a multiple choice question, blah, 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 etc., etc. And these will test the skills from that lesson. We can flag questions to come back to them later, skip around just like on the real SAT, and then we'll finish the quiz when we're done. But what we can also do is we can go ahead and review all of the quizzes that we've already finished. So after I finished that quiz, it would take me directly to a page showing how many of those questions I got right, as well as allowing me to review each of those questions. But I can also go back in and go, all right, maybe I need to review this lesson. I didn't quite spend enough time on the quiz. So in this case, I can go in and click on all of the different questions in the quiz and review them. So question 1, maybe I got it right, but I'm not 100% sure. In this one, we've got a written explanation as well as a video explanation. So I might watch this to try to see how I could get it more confidently next time. For this one, again, a video and a written explanation. So, depending on your performance on the quiz, your level on the different skills will be adjusted. And what that means is that it'll affect whether or not you see that lesson or quiz again. And if you do see that lesson or quiz again, what difficulty it'll be at. So you'll see that for solving systems of linear equations, I'm core. I'm advanced for solving single variable equations. I've only reached mastery on one skill, which is in writing, so maybe my math needs a little bit more work. So every question also has a detailed written or video explanation outlining the process for interpreting the question and solving the question, as well as how to avoid common traps like we just saw. So going back to our slides. So if this sounds interesting to you, and if it sounds like it could help with your prep, which in pretty much all cases, it can. We've again got a special sale going on right now just for the guests at this webinar. Now, the best part about this is that there is a 5-day free trial, which we've mentioned in the chat already, but the 5-day free trial means that if you try out the program and it's not for you, you don't have to pay. And what this also means is that these 5 days don't start until after you take your diagnostic. So if you sign up for the program and don't have time to take your diagnostic yet, no problem. You can wait until the weekend and jump in then. You can also wait even longer and start your 5-day trial later. So again, the link is going to be on screen or in the chat. You can sign up at any time during the webinar. And again, it's totally risk-free because of that 5-day free trial. So you can sign up at any point, but for now, we're going to go ahead and go on to some more of our hardest SAT math questions. All right, so go ahead and give this one a read, and we'll reconvene in 30 seconds. All right, going ahead and jumping on in. Again, we see a word problem. Kind of sensing a theme here. A lot of the most difficult SAT math questions are word problems. So again, we're going to take it one piece at a time and make sure to organize our information as we go. All right, so at the top, we see Alan drives an average of 100 miles each week. Okay, so 100 miles per week. And if we look a little further, just peeking ahead, we see, okay, miles per gallon of gasoline. Weekly expenditure, $4 per gallon. How many fewer miles should he drive each week? What we're noticing here is that we have a lot of ratios. We have a lot of rates. And whenever we have a rate, a really good idea is to express it as a fraction. And this is a really good way to keep track of our units. So we'll go ahead and write this information down as a fraction. So we know that he drives a total average of 100 miles per 1 week. Cool. All right, next sentence. His car can travel an average of 25 miles per gallon of gasoline. Cool. So 25 miles per 1 gallon. Awesome. Alan would like to reduce his weekly expenditure on gasoline by $5. So he wants to do $5 fewer per every 1 week. Okay, I'm noticing some similarities here. 1 week, 1 week. Okay, maybe we can use that later. Assuming gasoline costs $4 per gallon. Okay, and again, some similarities. Gallon, gallon, dollar, dollar. Okay, cool. Which equation can Alan use to determine how many fewer average miles M he should drive each week? So he wants to drive M miles fewer per every 1 week. All right, so again, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different things that we're working with here, and we're trying to make an equation. And we're trying to make an equation that helps us solve for M. So if we're not really sure how to build an equation that looks like this, a really good idea is to start with our units. We're looking for M miles fewer per 1 week. So we want to try to build in other numbers, other rates that'll give us miles fewer per week. So how can we do that? So we've already used this one, so we'll go ahead and cross it out so we make sure that we don't use it again. Well, let's start with fewer and week, right? So we want 5 miles fewer. Let's deal with the other fewer. All right, so we want to go $5 fewer per week. So now I've got a fewer on the top, I've got a week on the bottom, but I've introduced a dollar sign. So now I've got dollars and I want miles. So I want to get rid of dollars and introduce miles. Well, how can I do that? Well, looking for dollars, I see dollars right here. So let's go ahead and bring that in, but we'll want to flip it. Because we want to get rid of dollars, we have dollars on top, we want to put dollars on bottom so that the dollars will cancel. So again, we're crossing out as we go to make sure we don't double use our information and we're keeping track of what we've taken account and not. So dollars cancels, cool. We've got fewer, week, but now we have gallons and we still want miles. So how do we do that? Well, looking for gallons and miles, I see one term that defines both of them. All right, I think this is it. So to get rid of gallons, we're going to want to put gallons on the bottom. It's already on the bottom. Awesome. And to get miles on the top, we're going to want to put miles on the top. So again, crossing that out, gallons cancels gallons, and now we have miles. So we have miles fewer per week. This should work. So let's go ahead and cancel out all of our different units because we have the same units on both sides. Now we have 5 times 1/4 times 25 equals m. Sweet. But what we notice is that the answer choices, they're not solved for m. M is next to a fraction. So what can we do to make our answer look like that? So I'm noticing that there's a fraction with 4 and 25 next to the m. I'm thinking I want to move our 4 and our 25 next to the m. So to do that, we want to multiply by 4, divide by 25, and we get 5 equals 1/25 times 4m. Bringing that together into one fraction, we get 4/25 m. So looking at our answer choices, this matches up perfectly with D, which is our answer. So we notice we didn't even use this one term. So again, multiple variables can be confusing because a lot of them are necessary, but some of them aren't. So takeaways. Organize your information, especially when there's a lot of units. Canceling those units is going to be really important to you. So organizing them in a way that makes sense will help you a lot. Similarly, pulling them out of that paragraph and into a form you can use, again, is going to help you make sure that you're using all the information you have. Similarly, if you don't know what to do, you don't know how to set up your equation, a good move is to go, okay, what can I do? What do I have? So if we're not sure how to get to the units we want, think about, okay, how do I get rid of this unit I don't want? How do I introduce a unit that I do want? It's not going to come all at once, but it will come piece by piece. Again, we also want to use the answer choices to rearrange what we have into the right form. We didn't want to cancel our 5 and our 25, didn't want to put those together. What we did want to do is make them look like the answers themselves. And again, we want to avoid unnecessary work. So we could have done a lot of extra work with that unit we didn't need. We could have gone in and tried to actually solve, didn't need to do that. We could again have put these numbers at the end together instead of building the equation that we wanted. So avoid unnecessary work when possible. All right, question 4. Again, take 30 seconds to give this a read, and then we'll go ahead and go over it together. All right, jumping into this one. This one is not a weird problem, and this one is much shorter, which might make us think, hey, it's gonna be simpler, until we see that it's about trig. So maybe it's not gonna be simpler. So going ahead and reading this one, we see, okay, in triangle RST above, sweet, gives us the diagram. We don't have to draw it ourselves, but we know we're gonna wanna use it. Point W, not shown. Uh-oh, okay, so there's something that they didn't actually draw on the diagram. We do want to draw that ourselves. Point W, not shown, lies on RT. Okay, so let's draw point W. All it tells us is that it lies on RT, so we can pretty much put it wherever we want. So I'm going to decide to put it here. All right, we want to find the value of RSW and WST. All right, so RSW, we need a line here. WST, we still need that line. So we'll go ahead and draw on that line, and then we'll define our angles. So this is going to be RSW, and this is going to be WST. Cool. All right, so we want to find the value of cosine of RSW minus the sine of WST. Okay, so we're maybe thinking, all right, Pythagorean theorem. We're thinking, all right, SOHCAHTOA. But we should notice something here. These triangles don't have 90-degree angles. Our original triangle definitely did, so we could use the Pythagorean theorem to find the length of this line. But why would we? It's not useful to us because we can't use SOHCAHTOA. These are not 90-degree angles. So there might be something more complex going on here. All right, so let's think about it. What else do we know about these angles, about what's going on here? Well, one thing that we do know is that W intersects a 90-degree angle. So we know that RSW plus WST equals 90 degrees. Okay, does this make us think of anything? Now, hopefully at this point, the combination of 90 degrees, the fact that these add up, they're complementary, and the fact that we're dealing with trig makes us think of a trig identity. And that's that the sine of theta is equal to the cosine of its complementary angle, so 90 degrees minus theta. Now, if we didn't think about this, this is probably not going to be a question we're going to get right. So this is an example of a question that is on a slightly more difficult concept. So if we do think of this, then what we're going to notice is, okay, if the sine of theta is equal to the cosine of the complementary angle, well, that means the sine of WST is going to be equal to the cosine of RSW because these two are complementary angles. Okay, what does that mean to us? Well, if we subtract the sine of WST over, we get cosine of RSW minus the sine of WST equals 0. And that's our answer. Now, this is a particularly complex question because we don't get any answer choices, right? There are no clues here. This is a grid in. So that makes our lives a little bit more complicated. But what we should notice from this question is that we should draw anything that's not given. If it's not given to us, we need to draw it to be able to understand this problem conceptually, unless you're really gifted at imagining things, which I am not. We also want to notice if a problem looks too complicated, we're going to look for a trick. So we had a bunch of trig, we were ready to use our formulas, but the basic principle that we're looking for, the fact that we can base this off of a 90-degree angle, isn't there. So there must be some sort of trick there. And we also want to make sure that we remember our trig identities, including some of the more complicated ones. This is probably the most complicated and weird trig identity that we do need to remember, but it's definitely one that does come up. All right, so bringing it together, we're going to talk about strategies for tackling difficult SAT math questions. So some kind of overarching ones, some that we've already mentioned, as well as some study strategies. So to start, take it slowly. We noticed that a lot of these questions were particularly complicated and had a lot of stuff going on. If we try to do the whole problem at once and try to do it too quickly, we're not going to be able to. What this also means is that we really need to manage our time so that when we hit these questions at the end, we have enough time to get through them. We also want to be sure to take the problem step by step. So this goes hand in hand with taking it slowly. And this is particularly important when we are interpreting the problem. We want to be sure that we are getting all of the information out of it before we're jumping in. And that when we are jumping in, we're not immediately shooting for the answer. We're trying to make sure that we are doing our due diligence. This is also a great principle to keep in mind when we don't know how to get to the answer. In that case, we're just going to do the next step because it's the only thing we know. We also want to make sure to draw diagrams and organize our information. So for every problem, there's going to be some sort of way to map it out to make it easier for ourselves to understand. And this is especially true for difficult SAT problems. There's a lot of information. So we want to make sure that we are making the information in the question easier for ourselves to understand, to save ourselves time. It takes more time up top to break this information apart, but it saves us time down the road. We also want to be sure to use the answer choices to our advantage when we have them. So for question 4, we didn't have them, unfortunate. But for the other 3 questions, we did, and we used them for several different purposes. We used them to plug things in. We used them to check that we were going the right direction with our work. We used them to eliminate answer choices early. So be sure to use the answer choices to your advantage. Now, these are kind of getting into more study habits that will help you tackle difficult SAT math questions. And the first thing is to review concepts you're shaky on. So we want to make sure that anything strategy related that we're still, not strategy related, content related that we're still struggling with, we're really focusing on. That question types that are really giving us grief, we're spending more time with. So maybe if you struggled with the last one, you're going to want to spend more time with trig. If you struggled with the third one, maybe spend more time with rates. If you struggled with the second one, maybe spend more time with systems of equations. If you struggled with the first one, maybe spending more time with linear equations. So we want to be sure that we're focusing on the things that are most important, which is, again, what the PrepScholar program is all about, making sure that you're reviewing the stuff that's right for you. And then we're also going to want to review your mistakes mercilessly. Now, what does that mean? A lot of folks go, oh, I got the question wrong. All right, here's the answer. Okay, cool. Maybe read an explanation. Great, all right. And then they move on and they make the same mistakes over and over again. They think that doing a lot of problems is as good as actually learning from those problems. I can't tell you how many students buy an SAT book, work through it from front to back, and think they're going to ace the test. And they don't. They don't improve really at all. So what we want to make sure that we're doing is we're reviewing our mistakes. We're focusing in on the things that are getting us, we're fixing them, and then we're making sure never to make those mistakes again so we don't build bad habits. All right, so how can PrepScholar help with that? So PrepScholar primarily helps with the last 2 points. It helps with the previous points as well, but the last 2 are particularly important. So that's reviewing concepts and reviewing your mistakes. So the customized study schedule on PrepScholar's online program ensures that you're working on the concepts that you need to be working on, and that you'll see them again if you haven't quite gotten them. And then similarly, the ability to review those missed questions in those quiz reviews with detailed explanations gives you the opportunity to home in on your mistakes and fix them before they become a problem. So again, if you're still working on your SAT prep, and especially if you struggled with any of the questions in today's webinar, I highly recommend you take advantage of the special discount and the 5-day free trial to sign up now. So if you go ahead and do this, you can click the link, and what'll happen after you click the link is you'll enter your email. And then once you enter your email, you'll be given another link, and you'll go ahead and follow that. And that'll take you to the sign-up process. Now in the sign-up process, you'll start with a quick questionnaire. And again, this is going to help start creating that customized account. Then to get your account, you'll enter your credit card info. Now, I know I said 5-day free trial. Why are you entering your credit card account? What's going to happen is they're going to put a hold on your card, but they will not charge it. And again, that 5-day free trial doesn't start until after you take your diagnostic. So once you take your diagnostic, you have 5 days, again, to cancel, and your card won't be charged. So if you want to sign up, you absolutely can right now. It's totally risk-free. All right, before we move on to our final question, we're going to go ahead and do a quick Q&A. So you can go ahead and pop your questions in the chat. I see that a lot of you guys have already asked some questions. And then while I have the questions up, I'll leave this link up. This is, again, a really great opportunity to sign up. If you have any issues with your sign up, you can put them in the chat as well. But for now, go ahead and ask any questions that you have in the chat, and we'll see if we can answer. All right, I'm seeing someone commenting that the College Board website says they take off points for wrong answers. That is not true on the SAT exam. Not true. So what that means is that you should guess on every question. Even if you're at the very end and you're just randomly filling in letters, you should do it. Okay, what types of math subjects should you know before the SAT? Quite a few, but the SAT really only covers math up to a certain level. It's only going to cover things that you will cover in high school. It's not going to get up into calculus. The absolute most difficult in terms of content that it gets is going to be trig, and there isn't going to be a whole lot of that. So you're going to want to cover arithmetic topics, algebra topics, geometry topics, and be prepared to deal with word problems as well. And again, all of these subjects are covered on the PrepScholar online program. So again, if you're interested to see how we break down those skills, you can sign up now. Will this video be posted? Yes. Once it uploads after the webinar, we'll post it on our channel. So you'll have to give it probably about a minute for everything to buffer. Sorry, not a minute, about an hour for everything to get uploaded, but then it should be available. And I believe we'll also be sending out the link to the recorded video if you want to take a look afterward. Are the hardest questions at the end? For the most part, yes, but it is going to depend on you. So what questions you struggle with the most isn't going to be the same as the questions other people struggle with the most. I'm going to go ahead and pop my face up real quick. So the most difficult questions according to the test takers will be at the end, but that doesn't mean you're not really going to struggle with question 2 and find that the last question is really easy because you just studied it yesterday. So yes and no. Which is easier, ACT or SAT? Depends on you. What you should do is take a practice test for each one and find out. One test has advantages over the other. They both have their own advantages. The ACT section, probably the biggest difference on the ACT is that they have the science section, which is a lot like the reading section, but just very, very technical and with a lot of diagrams. That does present some extra challenges. What we also find is that on the ACT, each of those sections are weighted equally, whereas on the SAT, math is a whole half of your score. So the math on the ACT is weighed a little bit less. ACT tends to be kind of faster paced on the questions, but often the questions are a little bit simpler. So again, if you really want to know if it's right for you, you should take a practice test for each and then compare your percentile on either of them. What formula should we have memorized? We actually have a great blog article on that. So if you search PrepScholar SAT math equations or SAT math formulas, you should find it. Is taking pre-calc necessary for the SAT? No, not at all. How to reduce the number of silly mistakes you make? That's a really great one. Write things down. Write things down and give yourself more time with the question stem. That's often where people mess up. I like to say to my students that folks tend to miss problems in the first 30 seconds or the last 5 seconds. So if you're missing those problems, it's likely because you're not setting up the problem correctly, or at the last minute you're forgetting to go back and go, wait, did I answer the right question? I'm not 100% sure. So slow down with question interpretation. And write things down. How to study for the math section, same as you study for any section. Hone in on your mistakes and focus on those things. If you're really struggling, I really recommend purchasing some sort of a program that will help you focus on the content. If you're already scoring pretty high, and even if you're not scoring particularly high, you can do this on your own, but you will need to be diligent about focusing on the things that are right for you and not focusing on the things you want to study for. So I see a lot of students who are really focused on doing like trig and probability and, you know, things that are particularly challenging because they're going, yeah, this will really get me a high score. But every question is worth the same amount of points as another question. So it's actually a pretty bad idea. We want to be sure that we are instead dedicating our time to the things that we're struggling with, even if they're not as hard. Okay. How many points is the math part out of? So it's a 1600, so the entire SAT is a 1600 score. The math part is 1800, or what am I talking about? The math part is 800, and the reading and writing part is also 800. So it makes up about half of your score. For reading comprehension advice, not really the point of this webinar, but I would recommend going to our blog and looking for reading comprehension articles. We have a bunch of them. My main advice would be skim and predict your answers. Taking the SAT in March and need to improve. Oh, we've already answered that in the chat. Possibly. Okay. How long should I take preparing for the SAT? Again, it really depends on you. It's going to depend on how much you want to improve. So if you're looking to improve 20 points, yeah, you can maybe do that in 2 weeks. If you're looking to improve more than that, you probably want to invest more time. And not just more time over the course of 2 weeks, but a longer period of time so you can better kind of internalize that information. All right, I am going to do another math question. Just want to make sure that I get through a good number of these questions. We'll probably take about 2 more minutes on the Q&A, and then we'll go ahead and do our last question. After you finish Algebra 2, will you know everything you need for the test? You will be missing some trig content. Again, there isn't a ton of it, but it is important to know for some of these harder questions. So, for instance, like that question 4 would be particularly difficult to do if you don't have any trig background. That said, the trig that is on the test is usually kind of lower level trig. So if you do a bit of a primer on trig, learn about it maybe through PrepScholar, you'll probably be okay. Questions about the ACT, not really relevant here, but again, advice is very similar to the advice for the SAT. Focus on mistakes. How do you combat the short amount of time given? Short answer, skip questions. If something is not coming to you, and if you've gone ahead and taken, 30 seconds up top to kind of break the problem down, write down things that are important, and you still don't know what you're solving for or where to go, move on, skip it, come back to it later. Again, every question is worth the same amount of points as any of the other questions, so we want to make sure that the ones we are likely to miss or likely to guess on are the ones that we are most likely to miss. So prioritize the questions that you think you'll be more successful on is kind of the short answer for that one. Otherwise, practicing the strategies here and getting more familiar with the question types and the content. How many hours to complete the program? Kind of depends. Kind of depends on how much work you need to do. So if you're starting out with all core levels, that will take longer than if many of your skills are already advanced. Similarly, if you are taking the quizzes over and over and over again and not leveling up on them, it's going to take longer than if you really put in the due diligence and make sure that you are leveling up as frequently as possible. Algebra is a large portion of the math section. Can you increase 70 points for the March SAT? Yes, absolutely. In general, can you personally increase 70 points? Kind of depends. If you're hanging out at a 1530, that's going to be a little harder than if you're hanging out lower than that. It also depends on how much time and effort you're willing to put in. But theoretically, yes. A lot of questions here that are not particularly useful, like how much studying for a perfect score. Again, it's really going to depend on how good your study is and where you're starting. So it's a good idea to take a diagnostic, and then from there, you'll be able to make a better call. We have good articles about how much you should study for. Okay. Cool. All right, we're going to go ahead and jump into our last question. Feel free to continue asking questions in the chat. We'll be around during this last question, and we can answer it there. But we'll go ahead and do that one now. All right, so final question. Go ahead and give it a look. 30 seconds, and then we'll get back to it. And again, if you need to go, we are a little bit over time. You can think about this one as a bonus question. So if you need to leave, thank you for being here. But if you want to stick around, feel free. Okay, hopefully you've had enough time to give this one a read. Again, word problem. Again, diagram. So again, we're going to use our diagram. We're going to take it slowly and try to break this one apart. All right, so we start out by going, okay, a gear ratio, R to S, is the ratio of the number of teeth of two connected gears. Okay, again, a ratio, just like a rate, we're gonna wanna write as a fraction. That makes it easier for us to do math with, so that we see the ratio of the teeth is R to S. Cool, and that can be from A to B, B to A to C, C to A. All it matters is that the gears are connected, and all of these gears are. Cool, all right, moving on. The ratio of the number of revolutions per minute, or RPM, of two gear wheels is S to R. So, okay, again, we can set this up as a fraction. So the ratio of RPM is S to R. Now, this is kind of interesting. When we put these next to each other, we see something here. So this is R to S, this is S to R. Same variables here. Now remember, we talked about earlier with that problem about handedness that we want to be careful that when two variables don't mean the same thing, we don't use the same variables. But we also want to pay attention to when they do use the same variables, they mean the same things. So this R is the same as this R, and this S is the same as this S, which means that these two are inverses. So if the ratio of teeth is 1 to 2, the ratio of RPMs is going to be 2 to 1. If this is 1 million to 57, this is going to be 57 to 1 million. Again, plugging in some numbers to try to understand this a little bit better. All right, in the diagram below, gear A is turned by a motor. The turning of gear A causes gears B and C to turn as well. Cool, this all makes sense. Also, looking at this diagram, we see that it tells us that gear A has 20 teeth, gear B has 60 teeth, and gear C has 10 teeth. So we know things about the number of teeth. We don't know anything about the RPMs at this point. All right, peeking ahead at our last sentence, we see if gear A is rotated by the motor at a rate of 100 RPM, what is the number of revolutions per minute for gear C? Okay, so we see that we're dealing with gear A and gear C. Gear B is not mentioned anywhere. So we're gonna go ahead and just ignore it. We don't really care about it. So we're gonna go ahead and try to set these up for A and C. All right, so going back to our diagram, we know that gear A has 20 teeth and gear C has 10 teeth. Let's pop that in. So here, R over S is gonna be equal to 20 over 10. We can simplify that, make it 2 over 1. So if R over S is 2 over 1 and the RPM is the inverse, then S over R is going to be 1 over 2. Okay, cool. Now we can actually move on to this last sentence. So if gear A is rotated by the motor at a rate of 100 RPM, what is the number of revolutions per minute for gear C? So we get the rotations per minute for A, and we're trying to find the rotations per minute for C. At this point, teeth is not really useful. We can kind of just pretend it's not there. But we notice that this 100 doesn't quite align with the ratio we're given. So we're making a new and equivalent ratio. So how do we do that? By setting up a new and equivalent ratio. So we'll define the thing that we want to find as a variable, because we don't know what that is, but we do know that RPMs for A is 100. So how do we solve for X? Well, we could go ahead in and do cross multiplication. 1 times X equals 2 times 100. That's pretty clear. Or we can just look at it. How do we make this equal 1/2? By making the bottom double the top. So X must be 200. All right, what do we learn from this question? Don't skimp on question stem interpretation. So many students read this and they don't recognize that R to S and S to R have the same variables, and that really messes them up here. We also want to be sure that we're organizing our information, so here taking our ratios and turning them into fractions that we can more easily use. We also want to be sure to define our variables carefully. Kind of talked about this already. We want to do logical checks using small numbers just to make sure that we really understand what's going on. So if teeth are 1 to 2, then RPMs are going to be 2 to 1. And then finally, we want to avoid unnecessary work. So what does that mean? In this case, it's avoiding gear B. We don't need it, so we just pretend it's not there, and we only deal with A and C. And that's it. That's all we've got for the webinar today. So again, if you are still here, thank you for being here. Thanks for viewing. Hopefully this was helpful. If you have more questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll stick around for a little bit longer to answer those. And again, if you want to sign up for the PrepScholar program using this discount, you absolutely can. And again, this discount is going to expire 24 hours from the end of the webinar. So at 8:30 tomorrow, that discount will expire. So if you haven't already signed up, please take the opportunity to sign up in the next 24 hours. It's totally risk-free because of the 5-day free trial. So it's absolutely worth your time. Thanks again for being here, and we'll stick around in the chat for a little while longer.